Did bringing a new baby into your home feel like the most intense thing you have ever done? Were you surprised by how difficult it felt and how in the moment you were and how overwhelmed you might have felt with all of the care tasks you needed to do for yourself, for your new baby, for your family, for your home? And did it feel in that moment like this time in your life would never end? And it is hard to gain the perspective of this too shall pass. I'm going to get through this. I'm just going to make every best decision as I can. And I'll take each day as it comes and do the best I can every day. This conversation with Alison reminded me that's kind of what it's like throughout every phase of parenting. Our kids are going to turn out okay. We are going to do the best job we can. And if we need to pay for therapy for them sometime down the road, then we definitely will. And as hard as any phase of parenting feels, we will do it. We will get through it. And at some point, we will not be facing that challenge anymore. So soak up Alison's wisdom and her advice and feel renewed by having a guest who can bring us this perspective.
My name is Alison Brown, and my daughter is now very grown. She's going to be 21 in October, but we did the nursing thing for well over a year and a half, so probably about 19 months, because everything with babies you count in months.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, she's our only daughter. She's our only child, I should say,
Uh-huh.
and she's pretty amazing.
That's
And
awesome. We should have, before we hit record, calculated her age in months now.
I know. Oh, it makes me laugh. So many people on Instagram do those. My 64-month, that was a joke.
Right.
My
Uh-huh.
64-month-old baby.
Right. Yeah. I think it's so important to hear stories, cross-generational stories of baby feeding because for me, it uncovers systemic barriers that have been existing for multiple generations. And then sometimes it also shows, okay, so we've made improvements in this area or that area. But more often than not, it actually shows that we haven't made as many improvements as we would like to think in the area of support and cultural barriers that exist.
You know,
So I
I
think
I
it's
was
go ahead.
I was very lucky in that my family was very supportive and used to it. My sister had breastfed both of her children. My mother had tried to breastfeed her children, though that was in a very different time and had a great deal of trouble. My husband was very supportive. But yeah, did I ever nurse in a car or a bathroom or under a blanket? Absolutely.
Yeah, and at the time, it probably just felt normal. That's just what you did.
What, you didn't even think about it.
Yeah, so I feel like this is an area where in many parts of the country, we have improved. We can for many of us, we can nurse anywhere and everywhere. Not for everybody, but for many of us, we can. And I do hear in the stories of people, even just one generation difference, that was not the case.
20 years ago, there was acceptance, but not accommodation. So it was assumed when I went and delivered my daughter, it was assumed I was going to breastfeed her, at least in the hospital that I was in. I had a C-section, so I was there for a longer period of time. And unfortunately, the nursing assistant was out sick the week that I delivered, but it was assumed, the appointment was made for me to see her. The
Mm.
nurses were all very supportive, but there weren't nursing rooms in the malls. That came a little bit later. There
Mm.
wasn't We had lots of very thin coverings and made it very easy, but you had to totally be covered up.
Mhm.
So it was, "Yes, that's great, but we're not going to change anything for you."
And not only are we not going to change anything for you, but we also expect you to find a way to do this without showing anybody that you're doing this.
It's very true. I had a funny experience that you made me think of. So my great aunt had passed away, and we were having a service for her. And Sarah was little. She came with me, and it was driving a 2-hour drive. And so she needed to eat in the middle of Mass. And there's no place to go. It's in New York City, the car is way in the garage, there's no room, so I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm nursing her right here," covered up with just a blanket. I wouldn't have been comfortable without something anyway,
Mhm.
so I'm sitting there nursing her, and the priest processes out, it's towards the end of the mass, and he just looks over at me and then realizes what I'm doing, and I thought his eyes were going to pop out of his head.
Really?
Just it was a bit of not horror or not shame, just, "What is going on here?"
Oh my god.
So he didn't say anything to me, he wasn't dismissive, just this look of, "What is happening in my church? I don't know what to do in this situation. Should I look at her? Should I look away?" It was an
Right.
older man who, even without being a priest, probably would have been a little uncomfortable, but
Right.
I didn't even think about it. I thought, "Okay, I'm preventing this child from screaming through this entire service," and he didn't know what to do with it,
Yeah, it's as if you had walked in a bikini or something.
which would have been really hard because I am not a small-breasted woman to begin with,
Right.
and then I was nursing, and I'm thinking, "Could I just have a small child walk underneath me and hold these up?" It came out so far past the side of my chest, I was like a 42G for a while.
Wow.
I am not a large woman, and I'm just like, "Really? I had room for this.
Right.
There was space, you could," but they were so heavy most of the time.
Coming up, Allison tells us how she dealt with her extremely heavy breasts and what she did to make herself feel more comfortable, which is something we haven't heard yet on the podcast. But before that, we're going to take a quick break so I can share with you how much I love our sponsor, Feast and Fettle. I just want to remind you that when you support my sponsors, you're supporting me. You've heard me now for a few months talking about how much I've enjoyed getting home cooked meals delivered right to my front door from feastandfettle.com. And I'm here today to tell you that if you know somebody who is in the postpartum period, who you would like to provide true support to, that you should go to feastandfettle.com and order home cooked meals to be delivered right to their front door. One of the biggest barriers to breastfeeding success is a lack of support. A new parent is feeding a baby up to 15 times a day. How on earth do we expect that person to feed that baby that many times, also feed themselves, and provide meals to other members of their family? There's not enough time. You know how hard it is as a busy parent yourself to try to put meals on the table. Go to feastandfettle.com, use my code MILK, MILK, coordinate which meals they would like to have delivered, and send them a week's worth of delicious meals. And be the person who eases the burden for them. What a gift. I can't think of a better way to support somebody in the postpartum period.
I got a very good bra.
It's a necessity when you're dealing with that much weight.
Absolutely. And when I went to buy the bras, I actually went to one of these specialty bra stores, and Sarah came with me because she came with me everywhere because I was the one taking care of her, and the women were so funny. They're just like, it was the cliche. "Oh, you're nursing? Oh, we gotta get good bras for those girls. Yes, they're very heavy right now." It was like something out of a movie. It was fantastic. They were great, and they told me their stories about how nobody was supporting them, and they had to hide, and you couldn't even talk about it. You couldn't even say the word breast. So it was not that far removed
Yeah, that's
from where I
incredible.
was.
Yeah. Okay, so I would love to take you back. You said that your mom had attempted to breastfeed, your sister had breastfeed. I want to take you back to your childhood and to
Sure.
your cultural upbringing. Did you grow up in New York City?
No, I grew up in Westchester County, so just outside New York City.
Okay. And when you think about your cultural upbringing as a child and even in your imaginative play, did you play with baby dolls? Did you feed babies as a young girl? Did you see baby feeding? And if so, did you see and imagine both bottle and breast, or were you only exposed to one or the other?
I was the youngest child of my family, but also of the family friends. So I was the baby of the group. So I didn't see a lot of babies. I was around sort of babies in the greater community. Friends had younger siblings, but I didn't see a lot of babies. It was funny. And certainly playing with baby dolls was only a bottle.
Mhm.
There wasn't exposure to breastfeeding at the time, which is funny because I was a kid in the 70s and
Mm.
it was that back to nature and everything is loose and guitars and that earthy crunchy, we
Right.
used to call it.
Flower
Ye
children.
Absolutely. But my parents and my parents' friends were definitely more traditional
Mhm.
in the sense of what they're presenting. And I knew breastfeeding existed, but didn't really think about it. Never played with dolls in a way that would have pretended to breastfeed the child. It was always with a bottle. I never really thought about that. But I do remember when my niece was little, and this is obviously many years later, and she had a baby brother. She used to pretend like
Mm.
her mom breastfeeding her doll, and we all thought that was so adorable and so funny. So that was a new visual for us. So
Yeah.
definitely not from when we were kids.
I think kids imagine what they see.
Absolutely.
At least they start with that. They start with what they see, and then it goes all sorts of
Then
other
they go off
places.
on their own road and
Right.
you cannot contain them. That is for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And then you mentioned that your mother had attempted to breastfeed in a totally different era. Did you have conversations with her as you were preparing for motherhood yourself about her journey and what that was like for her?
Yes, so I don't know if she tried to feed my oldest sister. I know my middle sister, she didn't even attempt. And then for me, she tried and she was able to feed, me for only a couple of months, but it was a very stressful time in my family. My sister was very ill. So, she talks about that, how disappointed that her milk dried up. I don't even know if that's the what actually happened, but that was her experience,
Mhm.
that she tried to feed me and just could not produce enough milk. And we used to joke about my sister because when she fed both her children, we would say she could have fed triplets. So much, never had a production problem. So we talked about the different experiences
Mm.
within our family, and it was very relaxed. There wasn't a lot of, "Oh, you must breastfeed," or, "Oh, you can't breastfeed." It was definitely assumed I was gonna try, and I just assumed it myself. I don't remember even making that decision. It just was, "Okay, I'm not gonna be working." I knew for other reasons, and so I might as well give it a shot.
Mhm.
It was just with the flow of what was happening.
Yeah, okay. And then your sister had children before you?
Yes,
Okay.
so her 2 were older, and then my other sister had a six-month-old when my daughter was born,
Oh.
but he had been a preemie,
Huh?
so there was that whole
There were more complications.
very much complications, and then she had a daughter a year after me
Mm.
who adored breastfeeding and refused to give it up.
Okay. A whole 'nother difficulty. Yeah.
So there was breastfeeding around me and
Okay.
discussed, and it was normal for the kids to see. There was no problem, like, at a family Christmas, "Okay, baby needs
Okay.
to eat. I'm gonna go sit on the couch just because it's more comfortable, not because I have to go and hide."
That makes things so much easier. And was your dad around as well?
Oh, sure.
Was
He was the
supportive?
baby whisperer.
Oh.
If the baby wasn't sleeping, give her or him to my dad, and they would both go take a nap.
Okay.
So he was very comfortable. He was
Okay.
used to being a girl dad. We didn't use
Uh-huh.
that term, but he was absolutely. a
Yeah.
girl dad. He grew up in this house of women, so he got used to it really quickly.
Yeah, so he had no difficulty with you breastfeeding around him or
No, nor did my husband. It
okay,
just wasn't we never even talked about it,
okay.
which is funny now I think about, like, why did we never have this conversation? Because we just did,
Yeah,
and no one raised an objection.
yeah. Okay, so you're pregnant, you've had these conversations with your mom, you've seen your sister breastfeed, and then you said you took a preparation class. Was that
Yes.
helpful at all?
No.
I hear this a lot.
Not at all. So, the doctor offered there were 2 classes, one specifically for delivery, and then you could take the additional breastfeeding class as well. So, my husband I think it was probably very helpful to my husband more than to me because it was
Okay.
words and terms that he was not familiar with.
Yeah, that
He
makes
didn't
sense.
he did not grow up in a women-dominated household. So, all of this conversation was new to him. They showed you all the holds, they showed you what to expect, but okay, it
Mhm.
doesn't really prepare you for your circumstances
Right.
or your situation, but it did give me the language to say what's a hold, what's all those things, and then they go through the whole series of what can go wrong, which is
Mhm.
terrifying because 'cause you're
Mhm.
huge at that point and uncomfortable and scared, especially
Mhm.
when it's your first, and, "Okay, here's all the ways that breastfeeding can fail." But we're gonna do it so that you don't fail no matter what. There was this almost militance to it, which was not helpful either.
It's so hard to strike the right balance because we know that prenatal education can be helpful, but how do you do it in such a way that people understand that there are barriers that get in the way and you can get help through those barriers? And the best thing to do is just to make each next right decision as it comes, you
That's
know?
the one thing I would say to new mothers for everything. Nobody prepares you for your child or your family or your circumstances, and you're not dumb. You got this far in life.
Mhm.
You'll be okay.
Right, and nobody knows your baby better than you. That's the other thing. You spend the most amount of time with this little being than anybody else. So you go to other people for their expertise on various aspects of the physiology of taking care of a baby and of illness and human lactation, for instance. But in the end, we have to combine. I always tell my clients, I have to combine my expertise with lactation with your expertise of your own body and of your baby because I can't do my job without that.
Every woman is different, every kid is different, every
Right.
circumstance is different, and the experts are great and can be helpful. The other thing I would say is be careful who you ask advice of, because there will be that mother who has done everything right
Right.
and is mean about it. And I never understood that. And there are a lot we talk about mom shaming all the time, but
Mhm.
I don't think we talk about the the malevolence that comes from. And I never
Mhm.
understood that.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the psychology of that. It can be so damaging. And sometimes it takes a lot of us a lot of time to figure out who it's okay to ask, who is safe to ask advice from and who is not. And I feel like for a long time, I gave my power up for way too long. My kids are 9 and almost 10 and almost 6. So I'm still in the early childhood stages, but I'm long enough in that I've learned. I have my few people who I know that if I ask them a question, they're not going to take my power away from me. They're going to trust I'll make the right decision in the end, but they're going to give me some good tips to help me change my thinking.
I feel like I'm on a one woman crusade to tell moms that they're fine. So I'm old enough when I'm in a grocery store that they know I'm not competing with it. They know I'm closer to their mother's generation than theirs. And if a kid is ever crying, I'll be like, "Mom, you're doing great.
Uh-huh,
It's
right.
okay."
I know.
If the kid is acting up, I'm like, "Oh, he's fabulous."
I know. I do the same thing.
There is something I do wanna mention. So my daughter later was diagnosed with ADHD,
Mm.
and I realize now she was ADHD before she was born. Her behavior in the
Mm.
womb was excessive, and a lot of her behavior as a baby was now we understand from issues with her nervous system, and it made nursing helpful because I felt like, "Okay, at least I'm nursing her, at least I'm doing this," and it was
Mhm.
pretty much the only time she wasn't overstimulated. So, if mothers are struggling with a tough baby, I hate that phrase, but it is not because you ate peppers last night.
Right.
Sometimes it's just the baby's nervous system is not where it needs to be.
This is so true. Anthropologically speaking, we had much larger family groups that cared for every baby. So it's not always possible for every infant to be held as closely as my infant needed to be. However, you can still acknowledge that even if you can't always meet that need and say, there's nothing really wrong with my baby. He's just showing me what his needs are. And I can just lean into that as much as possible. And the rest of the time, it's okay that he's unhappy. He's still safe. And I'm still here with him. And I can let him know, even if I'm not able to pick him up in this moment. But it took me a really long time to connect those dots and realize what he was showing me as an infant.
Yeah, it was one of Sarah's doctors. I think one of the reasons she was diagnosed so young was because she had behaviors that were indicative of ADHD from a from infanthood, and we had the same doctors, and so when the question came up in school, the doctor said, "Oh, yeah, the yes,
Oh,
you need to
wow.
get her tested because
Yeah,
we've been seeing this all along," and
right.
of course, it's my failure. It's
Mm,
something that I did wrong, and almost having breastfed her was a relief, saying,
mm,
"Okay, I did that right, but I
right.
did that right, so I can't be in trouble for that." And I remember it was always such a relief because when she was nursing, she couldn't cry. She wouldn't cry,
Mm,
and I was like, "Okay, we can all be quiet for just, half an hour, 45 minutes." She nursed for a very long time, which would
mhm,
be incredibly isolating, 'cause it didn't feel like, "How much can I go anywhere? How much can I do? How much time do I have between activities?" Because there was no bottle, there was no pumping, there was
mhm.
that was not happening. So that can be very isolating and tough for parents as well, and goes back to where we started, where it was allowed, but not accommodated for. So
Right,
I could go
exactly.
somewhere, but I could be nursing in the car, or
Right.
I'd be nursing in this sort of weird corner.
And with the frequency that babies need to nurse, and some babies nurse way more frequently depending on your storage capacity and their ability to intake milk efficiently, that could be really frequently, and so if you only have 30 minutes where you could actually be somewhere socializing, it makes it really difficult to actually get out and be social, and that plays a heavy toll on your mental health as a new parent.
I got very good at doing things while she was nursing.
Mm.
Pretty much any meal I ate sitting down was while she was attached to me. I would sit down.
Yes,
I had this big comfy chair in our apartment at the time, and it was perfect because it put her body in the position where I didn't even have to hold her.
that's great.
She was just balanced, and of course, the chair was not bought for that purpose. It was
Right.
just our big comfy chair, and then I had my little snack table. And of course, my food was never terribly hot. It was always
No.
room temperature, but we joke about how many crumbs she had in her hair. Of course, she was born with a full head of hair, so she had all this hair as a baby. I'm constantly wiping food off her head from
Uh-huh.
things falling off, and she'll bring it up every once in a while, and I'm like, "You have gorgeous hair. It didn't hurt you."
Right. I constantly am telling my clients, "Oh, don't," like, they'll spill something on their baby's head, and I'm like, "Don't worry, you're gonna be doing that for years, for as long as you breastfeed this baby or snuggle this baby in your lap. You are going to be spilling things. As long as it's not hot coffee, you're good."
I remember I wrote the thank you notes for all the baby gifts, but then I couldn't do it when she switched sides. I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
wait, that
yeah.
can't." So there was a lot of things done
Yeah.
while I was nursing because she was such a demanding baby that there wasn't a lot of time to just there were no naps. There were
Yes.
no breaks, and
Right.
we were both exhausted all the time, so
Yeah.
it was a little rough, but you will get good at doing things. It
Right.
doesn't have to be this constant, "Oh, I'm staring into my beautiful baby's eyes." Sometimes you gotta return phone calls, and if
Mhm.
they're quiet and occupied, awesome, get it done.
When we have infants, it's a balancing act between how frequently during those care tasks do we tune into them, look into their eyes, make those connections, also knowing that we need those breaks too, and we get overstimulated and we are worn out from the monotony. And so balancing how frequently do we tune out and do other things, and how frequently do we take the time to tune into the baby? And for every person, that's a different ratio, and there's no standard answer, but just being aware of what that looks like for you and for your baby.
And I know I said before every child is different, but I will say that even for all my checking out, she's still as a quote unquote grown up. She's not grown up, but grown up, almost grown up. She'll be like, "Sometimes I just need my mommy."
Oh,
So it will not
yes.
affect your
No,
relationship with your child
no,
if
right.
you have to answer those emails,
Of course not.
some when
No.
they're attached and quiet, and it's great.
I know, yes, especially if you do have a baby who never wants to be put down, who is always attached. There has to be some time when you're doing other things.
And it's okay to not really enjoy it all the time.
Right.
To just be like, "I do not wanna look at you right now because 'cause you've been screaming at me for 3 hours,
I
but I have to feed you.
I
Okay, now
know.
just we're gonna be okay."
So you have this baby who is showing these symptoms of, or a toddler even, who is showing these symptoms that you later discovered were symptoms of ADHD. We now know there's a lot more that goes into it than just hyperactivity and behavioral problems. There's so much more. And so she had all of these sensitivity symptoms that she was showing even as a baby, and that came with some extra difficulties for you. Did you find that having those moments to connect with her through nursing helped to calm your nervous system as well? Or was it more overstimulation for you?
It wasn't overstimulation. I had some pretty severe postpartum depression, but the nursing helped because it was a reminder of I can't be replaced in a way. Nobody else can take care of this baby, and I was gonna be okay, and we as a pair were going to be okay. So, no, it was definitely not overstimulation, and it was calming, and it was reassuring because there was something I could do actively
Mm,
to calm her and
mm.
care for her and make her feel safe and not overstimulated and not overwhelmed by the world. If we were together and I was feeding her, it was calm.
Was she a baby that liked to nurse for comfort in addition to nutrition, or she only
Oh,
wanted
yeah.
to nurse when she was hungry?
Oh,
Okay,
no. She would have nursed 24/7 if she
okay.
could have.
Mhm,
She loved it. And I think because it was calming
mhm,
to her, whatever those endorphins are, was when her brain would quiet a little bit.
mm,
And because it was she was enveloped, she
mhm.
would feel protected from all that overstimulation that she was constantly being bombarded by.
Did you get a sense from other people, from, like, providers and other people that might have supported you, that there was any were they supporting you through nursing her for both comfort and nutrition, or was there any sort of pushback at the time that you were nursing?
No, it was the only pushback I ever got was one time very early on, I brought Sarah to the doctor because she was crying so much,
Mhm.
just the constant crying. We wanted to make sure we weren't ignoring anything. And the doctor said, "Your baby's fine. How are you doing?"
Mm.
And I hadn't really thought about it. And I'm like, "I'm not okay."
Oh. How
So,
old was she at this time?
oh, she was, I don't even think she was 2 months old.
Okay.
I wanna say she was maybe 6 weeks.
Mhm.
She was very little. And, "Are how's your supply? Is that going okay?" And I'm thinking, "It's going great as far as I can tell. She's gaining weight properly." All the things they say about count the diapers and all of that was great. And I could feel the supply. So
Mhm.
I knew. So it was that, and I wouldn't even call that pushback as much as awareness
Yeah.
of, "She's nursing all the time. This is hard on you."
No, I think that's actually a great question from a provider to say, "You are a dyad. Your health matters just as much as her health." But then was there any follow-up after that? That's really where if you hear from a parent who's, "I don't know, I'm frazzled," what's then the next step?
So she was very much reminding me, 1, that this is hard.
Mhm.
This Do you have support? Are you on your own? Are there people around you? And I did.
Mm.
I did have support. My mother was close by, my family was close by. But I felt like such a failure as a parent that I didn't wanna ask for help.
Mm.
It was kind of
Because
like,
she was crying so much and you didn't know how to soothe her all the time?
right, because I had this baby I couldn't take places, and we couldn't do things, and we would try and do things, but it was always so hard, and
Mhm.
so the nursing was going really well, so I didn't need help with that per se, and so I was more feeling, "I need help just doing this, so I must be doing it wrong."
That's really hard. You said that you had postpartum depression. Was that officially diagnosed, or in hindsight, you're able to look back and say, "This is what I was going through"?
It was not officially diagnosed, though I have been diagnosed since, and at different points in my life, I have had depressive episodes.
Right.
So it's not hard to recognize
Right, yes.
that's what was going on.
And so many people don't get diagnosed that I think so many of us just have to self-diagnose when it comes to perinatal mood disorders. We
It was not what it should be, and so many people, "It's baby blues, you'll get over it, it's hard,
Mhm.
it's a big transition," but you shouldn't feel like you can't get out of the house,
Right.
even
Yeah,
with difficulties.
and there are meds to help, of course. But also, I think our rates of perinatal mood disorders are so high because there is so little societal support for new parents that we are all on our own islands trying to care for our own babies that, of course, we're going to feel isolated and alone and unsure and lost because it really is an isolating experience to become a new parent.
And with the meds, I know at the time when my daughter was born, it was very popular to talk very much about the mother's diet and how that affected her milk. And
Mm.
you couldn't have this and you couldn't have that. And it was very restricted, even more so than when you were pregnant. So this was of the era of absolutely not a taste of alcohol, absolutely not a taste of tuna
Mm.
because there was mercury, no sushi, no peanut butter because that'll develop a peanut allergy.
While you were breastfeeding?
Yes,
Oh my goodness.
that
Oh, I
was the
haven't heard
advice.
this before.
Yes, that was the advice at the time, that while you are breastfeeding, it is the pregnancy restrictions plus.
Wow. Which is so false.
And then there was the old wives' tale about you drink beer to improve your supply. That had gotten thrown out the window. I'm not a drinker, so I don't know why I keep mentioning alcohol. But
Yeah.
it
But
was
still, for a
just
lot of people, it's hard to be so restrictive, whether it's beer or sushi.
the
It's a
peanut butter is what killed me. I had peanut
yeah.
butter throughout my entire pregnancy, and then you're reading all these parenting magazines and it's, "Oh, no, your child's going to develop a peanut allergy."
And now we know that early exposure actually helps prevent peanut allergies.
Somehow we always find a way in society to blame mom for
Oh,
everything.
yes. I know. It's
So
always our
that was the blame of my generation. It was what you were eating, what you weren't taking. So there was no question of, taking a psychiatric medication. You could barely take
Mm.
Tylenol. It was just
Mm.
absolutely not.
Wow. So, yeah, so even if you were to get a diagnosis, there was really nothing to be done about it.
Therapy and meditating while the baby is screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of, "You need to take some time for yourself."
Yeah, thank you for that.
And when do I do that? Maybe for the
Right.
4 seconds I get a shower?
Right.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you said that you had decided to stay home and you had been in the workforce previously.
Yes, so I was working, and then when I was 6 months pregnant, my husband got a job in another state, so we were
Mm.
going to be transferring, and I said, "I can't transfer my job. I'm this pregnant, I'm obviously not going to get a job now. Who's gonna hire this woman with the giant belly?" So, the assumption was, at least at first, I'd be home, and then it just became, she has all these extra needs. We could barely go to baby playgroups
Mhm.
because she just could not make them function for her. It was too
Mhm.
much.
Mhm.
So there was no way she was going into somebody else's care. I was afraid, because of how tough a baby she was, that another person wouldn't be able to handle it.
So then you had all this extra anxiety on top of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't even have a babysitter. She never stayed with anybody but my mother or my sister. Never had a babysitter.
Yeah, and were you a social person before that? Or
Yes.
okay.
To an extent. I do like my peoples. Now I have a podcast. I love talking to people, but I had my friends.
Okay.
I had my very small group of friends, and that was it. I wasn't a person who liked to go out at night or go to clubs or anything like that.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely did feel very isolated,
And so when
for a
you
little while.
moved for your husband's job, you moved closer to your family?
Yes, we moved
Okay.
back. So
Okay.
we were away and then actually moved back. So when she was born, I was living in the same town as my family, which
Okay.
we did on purpose.
Okay, so you had more family support, but then you had established this group of friends and you didn't have that. Did that group of friends, did they have children?
No,
Okay.
nobody had children, so it
Okay.
was a different environment.
Okay. And so then you did try to attend baby groups and meet other parents, but it just proved to be too difficult given the temperament of your baby and probably your own anxiety levels. Like
Oh,
maybe if
absolutely.
you were not experiencing so much anxiety, in addition to the difficult temperament, you might have been able to stick it through and find a way to make it work, but the double whammy made it impossible for you to really.
Absolutely. If I were in that situation now, my daughter jokes about that, I'll just say anything, and I always say to her, "I'm old, nobody cares." But when you're 30, you
Right,
think everybody cares. You're 50, nobody does care, so it's fine.
right,
So,
yeah,
yeah, it's very easy to look at it now and say, "Why was I so quick to scoop her up and run out the door?"
uh,
But I was, and that's where
right.
we were at the time. One thing a friend of my mother said to me, because we really struggled with toilet training, shockingly, we struggled with everything, but she said to me, "Nobody's gone to college in diapers." And I wish we told that to parents more about
Mhm.
nursing, or, like, when you have to wean. No college kid is still breastfeeding. You'll be okay. It will
Right,
all be okay. This is not permanently damaging. You are not causing your child to be dysfunctional. You do that in other ways, right?
right,
We all are just saving up for college and therapy
right, exactly.
for our children, and it's gonna be okay.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It is. And where I get frustrated is when there is external pressure put on. My child has to potty train before they go to this preschool or something. And I'm like, then find a different preschool if you can, because that's not fair to the child to have this external pressure put on them when they're not ready. But and sometimes in some areas, there just aren't enough options. And so I understand that sometimes there's not another choice, but it makes me so sad when it's not even coming from the parent, but it's coming from this cultural pressure to do something that doesn't align with the values of the family, yet they still have to do it.
It's so unimportant, but when you're in it, it
Uh-huh.
feels monumental. It
I
feels
know.
like all these choices you're making is going to shape this whole little person's
Right.
entire existence.
I know.
But it isn't one choice. It's the million choices you make every day. It is you as a parent in totality.
Yeah.
And if you're making those choices with the best information you have at the time, with the best interest of the child at heart, and doing your best to take your own craziness out of it,
Mhm.
you're gonna be fine with whatever choice you make.
Right,
The cherry
exactly.
jello is not going to make them psychotic.
Right.
It's gonna be okay.
Right. Yeah.
And remind yourself of that as a parent and be like, "This baby is awesome.
Right.
Look what we did."
Right.
I think that helps everybody. But
Right.
yeah, what 30-year-old woman can do that? I
I
certainly
know.
couldn't.
Especially when there's dishes piling up and laundry to
Oh,
fold.
and you feel terrible and you
Right.
feel you look terrible
Right.
and just the world is collapsing in on you. It's a little hard to be joyful.
It really is. Yeah. It really is. So, as we get here to the end, tell me a little bit about you said you fed for about a little over a year and a half or well
Yes.
over a year and a half?
I think it was 19 months.
Okay.
Just about there. So 1920, the weaning was very slow.
Yeah, you said your daughter loved nursing. So, tell me how
She
you approached weaning and what
she
the end
also
was
loved
like.
food,
Okay,
which was
that helps.
good.
Right.
So I nursed exclusively for the first 6 months,
Uh-huh.
and then we introduced solids. And I don't even know if that's how they do it anymore. It's
Yeah,
all changed.
yeah.
I know. I found out that they don't use rice cereal anymore.
No rice. It's yeah, it's not recommended, but some people
I
still do.
know. That was what we did. So that was a big easy switch during the day so that then she wouldn't be hungry. And we just started taking it out, replacing it with food. And that she never had a bottle ever. She
Wow.
tried. We tried, I'd
Uh-huh.
say. She rejected. And finally we just skipped to the cup, to a sippy cup.
Okay.
And she accepted that.
Uh-huh. With
Thank
cow's
goodness.
milk or your milk?
No, she never had breast milk any other
Okay.
way other than direct.
Okay.
So when she could have some juice or some water or eventually cow's milk,
Uh,
she had that. So it was just replacing. And then when I was down to 1, my supply disappeared.
mhm.
So she just was like, "Oh, there's nothing here." But that was hard because she still wasn't sleeping very well. So
Mm.
that was those first couple nights where there was no nursing before
Mhm.
bed. That was heartbreaking.
Mhm.
The crying was so bad. I was like, "I'll start pumping. I'll make it happen. It'll be fine." No, and she was fine.
Yeah, that's another instance of in the moment, it feels like it will never end. It feels like a family tragedy, but if you can just remember that this might take a few days, it might take a week, it might take a few weeks if I have a very persistent child, but in the end, it will happen, and it's okay if my child cries. My job as a parent is to not prevent all crying. My job as a parent is to be there and to be a calm presence for them through the storm. If I can remind myself of that, and it's a lot easier to say and do right here on a podcast when it's just you and me, and I'm not doing it with a crying child.
Absolutely.
But if we can do that when they are babies and toddlers, I have a feeling, and you can tell me because you have a 20-year-old, it probably is a lot easier when the stakes are higher when they're teenagers and the emergencies or the heartache is bigger to be the calm storm for them when they're upset about something because we can't fix all their problems as they grow older and get more and more upset. As a 10-year-old who can't find something he's looking for, I can't always change that, but I can just say, yeah, you're really upset about this. I can tell. I'm really sorry. I can't fix the crying. I can't end the crying, but I can be the calm storm. And it's the same for a baby who wants to nurse but can't when you're ready to wean. Yeah, I know you want to nurse. I'm really sorry. That's not available. I'm sorry that you're upset. I'm here for you. I can snuggle you, but that's not going to happen. It's that same attitude.
I'm terrible at boundaries, especially with my daughter.
Mhm.
She is our only, and she
Mm.
has had a lot of struggles.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so funny that you said, "Oh." mom can't always fix it because sometimes she'll come to me even now with an issue and I'll say to her, Mom can't fix this one." And she'll say, "Why not?"
Mm,
Which on the one hand sounds sad, but on the other hand, I take it as she feels like she can always count on me. So she's doing lots of things herself. I think she's just an amazing person. And she still sometimes needs her mom, and that
mhm.
never changes. There are times where I just wanna call my mom, and that's great.
Right.
That's great to want
Right.
to call your mom
Right.
or to want to
Exactly.
need your mother. I
Right.
don't think that's a bad thing, but in the moment, it feels like you are just the worst person ever
Right.
to have existed.
Right. It's so hard. Yeah. It's so hard when we can't stop our babies crying, but
And
that's
then there
not
are
always our
times where you're
job.
just like, "Oh, just please stop.
I know, right? Yeah,
Just
yeah.
please go away
Right.
and take your problems with you."
But here's the thing I also tell my clients who are weaning, you're not gonna break them. So if one night you're like, "You know what? I can't take it. I'm gonna nurse them." That's okay too. It's okay to decide each day what your boundary is going to be. You're not going to ruin them by making a different decision one night because your mental health can't take setting the boundary that night.
No kids going to college still nursing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So with that, are there any when you are old and you're thinking back on when your daughter was a baby, are there any memories that you hope to be holding tightly and remembering as clearly as you do now?
When she was a young toddler, so she's just learning to get around, we had a mirror that was on the closet, and she had these curls. She had this great hair. She still has great hair. And she used to go over to the mirror, and this is so her. She used to shake her curls, and she would say, "So pretty. So pretty." And I hope she always feels
Yes.
that way.
Uh-huh.
I wish she could hold on to that feeling. I wish all our daughters could hold
Yes.
on to that feeling of being a year old and just, I am just the most gorgeous thing ever.
I love that. What a beautiful story. And I want to give you some space. I found you I actually don't remember how I found
No one ever does.
you.
That's the funny thing. Everyone would be like, "I found you. I don't know how I found you."
I immediately reached out because you have a podcast that is near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
So do you wanna talk about your podcast?
Sure.
And then
I
I'll
it's my
comment on
favorite
it?
thing. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Okay.
It's called Keep the Flame Alive, and we focus on the Olympics and the Paralympics. And you are our guest, actually, coming up soon. We're going to have that show on. And we just tell the stories that don't get told in other places. Obviously, there's a great deal of coverage of the Olympics, tends to be very soundbitey, tends to be very, here's who won the gold medal. We want to tell some of the other stories that are just as important and just as fun and just as amazing to tell. So we've had the show for about 6 almost 6 years
Mhm.
and 300 stories,
That's
and
amazing.
it's been great, and we're gonna be going to Paris. We'll be there in person. We were in Beijing, and this will be our first Summer Olympics covering it in person.
That's so cool. And you get a press pass, right?
We did. This was so we the first time we got it for Beijing, and so we have a press pass for Paris, so we can go where fans can't go,
Yeah.
which allowed us to get some really wild questions answered.
Yeah. And will you be there for both the Olympics and the Paralympics?
We will. We will be there a very long time. My daughter's
Yes.
already complaining about my 2 months away in Paris. I was like, "You can come visit.
I know,
Uh,
right?
you can come see me." But, yeah, we'll be there the whole time.
That is incredible. And the reason I love your podcast, it's actually great. Every episode I've listened to has been
Oh, thank
incredible
you.
and amazing. Yeah. So it's really fun. But I love that the Paralympic stories that you tell and the Paralympians that you interview, it is not a special interest or a humanitarian story. And that really makes a difference for the Paralympic world to treat Paralympic athletes as athletes and to treat Paralympic sports as sports matters. And we talked a little bit in our discussion on your show about the progression of the Paralympics and what I've been able to see as a spectator in these 20 years since I've been a Paralympian, and how I've seen the growth in highlighting the Paralympic Games. But it's people like you who make that happen. People who care just as much about Paralympic sports as the Olympic sports. And that has a huge impact in growing the Paralympic movement.
We started covering the Paralympics because our listeners asked for some stories. What does this
Wow.
sport do? How do they do this sport? And then I started watching wheelchair rugby,
Uh-huh.
and I am a little obsessed.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And sled hockey, and my co-host Jill just thinks goalball is the greatest thing ever. So for us, it was, how have we been missing
Mhm.
all this great sport, all these
Mhm.
athletes? So to us, it was just a natural extension, and we were not interested in the typical story. We didn't make it a policy until somebody pointed out to us that we never ask a Paralympian how they became disabled or how
Mm.
they came to be in that, because we're not really interested. That
Yeah.
sounds awful, but we're much more interested in what's the differences of the wheelchairs.
Right. Yeah.
How does your prosthetic work? How does this sport operate? And that doesn't make us better. It just makes us geekier, I
Right.
think. We love to geek out on all these kind of things. We have an episode of how the horses get to the Olympics.
Yes, that's so cool.
You
Yeah.
know, so just that's what we're interested in. We're interested in the questions that aren't getting asked, the questions that we have. When we talked wheelchair rugby with Chuck Aoki, which was very hard for me not to fangirl.
Uh-huh.
I did a little. Jill kept me in check. It was all about, okay, what makes your wheelchair different than a street wheelchair?
Mhm.
Why is this constructed this way?
Right, exactly.
We talked to you about wearing the prosthetic versus not wearing the prosthetic.
Right.
And that's what's interesting to me.
Yeah, and do you know what? When we spoke, not only I had not told you my name when I competed in the Paralympics, you had figured that out, because my first and last name were both different. And I was talking about aspects of the competition, and I made some errors in talking about it. And I can't remember if it was you or Jill, but I got corrected. And I was like, oh, yeah, let me repeat that, because you had done your research about the tournament in 2004. You knew what you were talking about. You had not come to the table completely w- w- expecting me to carry the load. You had done your research about sitting volleyball and specifically about the 2004 Paralympics. So that was so cool.
It gave us an excuse. Honestly, we do this show because it gives us an excuse to watch all this stuff
Mm.
and to send the family away and say, I'm doing work for the podcast. And I'll
Right.
watch teen rhythmic gymnastics routines until I understand how the ball works. So it's really just, they talk about get a job you love and you never work a day in your life.
Uh-huh.
This is absolutely, we love this stuff.
Yeah.
We would do this anyway.
Uh-huh.
Now someone just put a microphone in front of us and we get to ask these questions and find out these answers and watch all this video and say, it is professional research. I am doing my job right now.
Yes, I know. So leave me alone.
It's
That's
great.
that's amazing. So people can find you anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Yes, so it's Keep the Flame Alive, and then we're flamealivepod.com.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to share your baby feeding story and for having me on your podcast. It was really fun.
Both have been amazing. This has been
Yeah,
so much fun
I
getting to
know.
visit with you again.
I know, it really was. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lo.
How are you feeling after hearing that perspective of somebody who had a very difficult time in the baby phase and now can really enjoy and appreciate her basically full-grown daughter? Such great advice from somebody who's been through it and got to the other side. If you would like to listen to my conversation on the Keep the Flame Alive podcast, You can listen to episode 301 that was put out in August on the 25th when women's sitting volleyball was new with Lo Nigrosh. And you can hear my reflections of being in the Paralympics in 2004 on the first women's sitting volleyball team. And if you feel that you never have time to do all the things you want to do, then I recommend that you go to feastandfettle.com and get $30 off your first week's order of home cooked meals delivered right to your door.